The following podcast is brought to you by PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. Audio is provided by Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com.
The Kohberger Bombshell. Last week, we told you about the investigation that wasn't in the Karen Reed case. This week, the Kohberger Bombshell and the investigation that was. All of this and more on this episode of Charlie Crime Buster, what some people are calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. The Charlie Crime Buster name and all forms and abbreviations are property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent unless or until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains adult subject matter. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hi, and welcome to the Charlie Crime Buster podcast. Glad to have you on board the Charlie Crime train today. Hey, do us a favor if you would. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and join with us as we begin this crime train ride. Well, my friend, a bombshell hit us last week. And as we in the world was awaiting for the trial of the century, that's right, it's been called the trial of the century. That would be the Brian Kohberger trial. Well, as we were awaiting that trial coming up, to our amazement, there was a bombshell. Brian Kohberger took a plea. Yep, took a plea. Pled guilty to the crime that no one can forget. He did that before a judge for the murders of the Idaho college students in 2022. Well, today we're going to look at this cold-blooded murderer who in just 16 minutes slashed and stabbed away everything good from the families of Maddie, Kaylee, Zana, and Ethan. I'm going to tell you some things about the case. Well, some things you may not know about the case. And we will tell you about the investigation that was compared to the Karen Reed one that wasn't. And we can now call him a murderer, not an alleged murderer. You see, he's confessed. And there's evidence to prove it. We can now call him the monster, the evil one, for he truly is cruel evil. And he brought it that terrible night on King Road. Brian Christopher Kohberger, 28-year-old guy, well, at that time he was, when he was taken into custody by the FBI SWAT team and the Pennsylvania State Police back on December the 30th, 2022. He was found there at the home of his parents, up there in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. And as we studied this killer, now we know he's a killer. He was born on November the 21st, there in Pennsylvania, in 1994. He finished the Pleasant Valley High School in 2013, attended the Monroe Career Technical Institute, but he dropped out a year later. But then he attended Northampton Community College there in Bethlehem, where he earned an associate degree in psychology. He did that in 2018. After he graduated from Northampton, well, he worked as a security guard. Yep, a security guard at Pleasant Valley School District. By the way, that was the same school district where his father worked there as a maintenance worker for many years. His mother, well, as a substitute teacher. He did receive a BA in criminal justice there in Pennsylvania. And in the summer of 2022, well, that's when he moved to Washington State. He was going there to pursue a PhD at Washington State University in Pullman. By the way, that campus, less than 8 miles from Moscow, Idaho, the site of these terrible, terrible killings. Now, at the time of those killings, well, he was a student there in criminology. He had completed his first semester just 9 days before his arrest. And we know now there's a possible trigger that may have triggered him into this killing spree. You see, Kohberger had been teaching as a teacher's assistant there at the university. And less than 2 weeks before the murders, well, the faculty members, they brought him in and they said, hey, we've got some concerns about your behavior and your conduct. In other words, they called him in on the rug to talk to him about his conduct. One can't help to ask, maybe this was what triggered him to begin his murder spree. Well, that meeting then led to Kohberger, being terminated from that teacher's assistant role that was on December the 19th. And that was based on, quote unquote, his unsatisfactory performance as a teaching assistant, including, now get this, his failure to meet the norms of professional behavior in his interactions with the faculty. Now, my friend, during that same time, in 2022, during that fall semester, there were 5 female University of Idaho students. They had lived in a rented off-campus residence there in that college town of Moscow, Idaho. It was a 3-story home, had 6 bedrooms, 2 on each floor. And get this, there had not been a murder in that town since 2015. Some of us live in towns where there's murders every year. In this little town, this quaint little college town, not a murder since 2015, before this tragic in 2022, these tragic murders, I should say. So what happened? Well, in the early morning hours of November the 13th, 2022, 4 University of College students, they were stabbed to death in a shared rental home close to the campus. 2 female victims, Maddie and Xana, they lived in the house. Third one by the name of Kaylee. She had recently lived there, but she moved out. And she had just returned to show Maddie her new car. Just back on that terrible, terrible night, just to show her friend her car. There was a 4th victim. His name was Ethan. That was Xana's boyfriend, who was sleeping over the night of the attack. So Ethan and Xana, they were out at a party, and they returned early in the morning. The 2 other victims, Maddie and Kaylee, they had gone to the Corner Club downtown at a sports bar at 10 p.m. They left at 1:30. You can even see live stream video on Twitch. You can see them standing by the grub truck. That was a food truck, 4 blocks there in the town, Main and 4th Street. You could see them there, talking, laughing. 1:41 a.m., chatting, smiling, getting their food 10 minutes later. Little did they know it would be their last night together. They then left that food truck and took advantage of a program that provided safe travel to students that had been out in the night. Now, according to the surviving roommates, the 4 students all were home by around 2 a.m. Between 2:26 and 2:52 a.m., there was a DoorDash order. Xana. It was delivered to the house around 4 a.m. Original reports say that most of them were in bed on the ground floor at the time of the killings. They were not attacked, these other 2, are held hostage, and they did not really wake during the killings. The probable cause affidavit for the case said that one of them, though, a surviving roommate, stated that she was sleeping on the 2nd floor, same floor as Xana and Ethan, before she was awakened by what sounded like noise and the barking of a dog. She stated that she later heard a roommate saying something to the effect that, there's someone here. She said she opened the door twice in a short period, and the second time she heard crying from one of the rooms and a male voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Security cameras near the home, it picked up the sound of whimpering, a loud thud, and a dog barking numerous times there in the home around 4:17 in the morning. That surviving roommate opened her door a 3rd time, and she saw a figure, a man clad in black clothing, a mask that covered his mouth and nose, walking toward her. She said that she did not recognize that person, and he exited through a sliding glass door. She said that she stood in frozen shock. Then she locked herself in her room. We know now that she also went to her roommate's room because she was so afraid that night. These 4 precious college students were stabbed to death on the second and third floor of the residence, where they were in bed. The victims were not gagged, they were not restrained, but the walls, oh the walls, that spoke in volumes, because those walls were splattered in blood. Maddie Cayley, they were found in Maddie's room. Xana and Ethan, found in Xana's room. Before the 911 call, well, the surviving roommates, they summoned friends to the residence. That next morning, believed one of the second-floor victims was unconscious, not waking up. They called 911 at 11:58 a.m. Mind you, this was over 7 hours after these killings occurred. They had requested aid for a quote-unquote unconscious person. So when police arrived on that morning, November morning, the door to the home was open. There was no sign of forced entry. No damage in the house. Nothing appeared to be missing. All 4 victims pronounced dead at noon. Detectives, they had said that they believed the killings occurred sometimes between 4 and 4:25 a.m. As they searched the residence, they also discovered a dog that belonged to one of the girls, which she had shared with her ex-boyfriend. That dog was alive, unharmed, on the 3rd floor. We now know, my friend, that there at King Road on that terrible night was 16 minutes of pure terror. Now, we have found out some things about this investigation that we did not know before, things that have leaked out through court filings, things from the press, people who have said things that were tied to the case. We now know that, early on we knew this actually, that Kohberger had dropped a night chief in the midst of his killing spree. We know that it appears that, well, that the 3rd floor was a target. He was probably targeting Maddie. Perhaps he was surprised that Cayley was there because she had come to show her friend her car. Maybe he was surprised there. He was also surprised, many say, by Xana, that they think that she walked up the stairs to check on her roommate. And then he chased her downstairs back into the room, where she was running back to Ethan, who was probably already asleep, passed out. Then this cold-blooded monster, Kohberger, killed both of them in a frenzy of rage. He even carved the legs of Ethan. Then, exhausted from this killing, he actually sat down in a chair of blood to rest. By now, we have seen him speed away in that white Elantra, the same one that was seen driving to the house, and just 16 minutes later, speeding away. We have seen that chilling security video. It's haunting to watch, knowing what he did in those 16 minutes. We now know that Kohberger planned out his killing spree. He cased out the house. His cell phone pinged on a tower near the house, well, some 23 times over those few weeks before the murders that night. We have now seen his Amazon account where he purchased a K-bar knife, the knife holster. The knife and his bloody clothes, well, they were probably discarded because he drove far away from the area and we tracked him on his digital footprint. The investigators tracked him, more than likely as he drove miles and miles and miles away right after the murder. Somewhere on that trip, he got rid of the knife and his bloody clothes. Well, we know that now that on more than one occasion, he actually went back on Amazon. Yep, back on Amazon. You see, he had purchased that K-bar knife from Amazon. That sheath that was left behind that night. He had purchased that on Amazon. So he went back to Amazon. And he actually had it in his digital shopping cart. He was going to purchase another knife to replace his that he'd gotten rid of. Why do you think he did that? Why was he attempting to do that? Perhaps he wanted to have it to show, just in case the police ended up on his doorstep. Or maybe, even more chilling to think, maybe he was thinking about getting the knife to kill again. He attempted to purchase the second knife twice, but he backed out, perhaps thinking that that would be even more suspicious. So instead, He then attempted to delete his shopping history from Amazon. We now know, though, that shopping history is on the record. He bought the knife sheath, the knife holster. Then, after he lost his holster, left it behind, with DNA on it, by the way, he sought to buy another one, and then backed out, then tried to delete the history of Amazon. As James Buckland, our producer, says, your digital footprint stays with you always. Now, we have since heard from people who knew this monster when he came to Washington, there in Pullman. They described him as weird, trying to fit in, but yet he failed to do so miserably. We can see his fixation on beautiful young girls that he could never have. We see that through his digital footprint, including Instagram posts, even of his victims. Oh, he hunted. He stalked his prey. Even on that terrible night on King Road, you can see him circling the house through the security cameras. Circling the house like a lion circles its prey, starts on the outer edge, moves in closer and closer and closer. And he waited for just the right time to strike in the early morning hours when he could surprise them, these innocent college students, perhaps in their sleep. We now know of his fascination of serial killers, how he researched Ted Bundy, how he seemed to be fixated on Ted Bundy, and it's downright creepy as we see him develop into a serial killer himself right before our eyes. You see, we follow him as he progresses. We now know that he's been tied to a break-in there, broke into a co-worker's apartment, rearranged the personal items, and then went on to become this monster that killed. That co-worker worked with him, had a key to her apartment in her desk, noticed that it was missing, but then strangely, that key was returned. That was the same desk, the same office that she shared with this cold-blooded killer. You see, we all know this now that we did not know before. And yet, my friend, we owe it to a top-notch investigation by law enforcement. That's how we know this. And we're going to get right into that. We're going to get right into that, what we call the investigation that was. Last week, we told you about an investigation that wasn't. How authorities blew the investigation of the Karen Reed case. But this one is different, much more different. And we're going to tell you about that. But first, let's take a breath. Let's take a break from the darkness, and let's take a moment to share with you Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Our Crazy Crook story today is a TikTok creator. Yep, a TikTok creator who's been sentenced after... can't make it up. After he uploaded a video where he was spraying pesticide on produce and meat at a local Walmart. Charles Smith. Yep, Charles Smith was sentenced on June the 24th to a year in prison for one count of adding poison or another harmful substance. That's according to court documents. Smith also received 3 years probation for criminal damage and solicitation to commit burglary and to run concurrently. That's again what court documents said. You see, this conviction came after a April 22nd guilty plea for the incident that happened on December the 19th. That was when this 27-year-old filmed himself committing the crime at a Walmart. And then he shared that video on TikTok and Instagram accounts. He entered the store, grabbed a can of Hot Shot Ultra Bed Bug and Flea Killer off a shelf, and then he sprayed a large number of lemons and other produce, even the chicken. according to charging documents. Well, eventually, he deleted the video. He insisted that in 2 follow-up videos that he discarded the contaminated food. That's what the Arizona Republic reported at the time. And charging documents said the video showed him returning to the store 10 minutes after spraying, and then he placed some of the contaminated items in a shopping cart, and he pushed them to an undisclosed part of the store. But much, much too late. Walmart actually removed the remaining items worth $931. That's what court documents said. So this idiot, this crazy crook, who thought it was cute to go in and poison food that some people might purchase and cause death, this idiot actually posted it all on Instagram for people to see. This idiot, who not only did his crime, but ended up doing his time, is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now let's talk about the investigation that was. And there are a lot of things that come to mind. One of the first things was for sure, when they got on the crime scene that day, they locked it down. They not only locked it down, they extended the crime tape into the yard, even beyond the yard. They did that immediately, and they held that scene secure. Secure, as they called in the experts who came in, and the crime scene technicians who took a lot of care to make sure that they were documenting the scene, to make sure that they were collecting evidence according to policy, to make sure that they were nailing down this crime scene. They held that scene, and it wasn't even until 18 days later, that police stopped searching through the house. For 18 days, they crawled through that house, finding every speck of evidence they possibly could. And that crime scene was guarded by law enforcement. How many of us recall seeing the picture there of the police car there before that house, even though the house was still, even though no one was going in and out of the house, there was still those law enforcement officials guarding that crime scene. Oh, not like the John O'Keefe scene that was not guarded, even one day really guarded. Nope. They guarded it. The second thing about this investigation that was, they were not afraid to get the best help available for the investigation. And even when they did that, they did not just turn the investigation over. No, they maintained their own role there in keeping Kohberger to justice. They called on help from the state police. They called on help from the FBI. Well, the other investigation, Karen Reed, the investigation that wasn't, they had the FBI as well, but for the wrong reason. There, the FBI was investigating the investigators. Here, the FBI worked alongside the investigators, providing resources that the Moscow police did not have. And because, my friend, because this was a professional investigation, things were held close to the chest. They were not leaked. Unlike the investigation of Karen Reed, where the lead investigator took it upon himself to text hateful, harmful information to friends and others in the most inappropriate way. And these investigators, they realized how good local media could be and how social media could help them. And instead of turning local media and social media against them, they all worked together. They all worked together to find out who did this and to bring him to justice. We all recall them getting the information out about that white Elantra, about that white car that Kohberger owned, and how they combed through all of those white Elantras, how they painstakingly investigated, and how they kept digging down, and they kept it all very close to their chest. They asked for help when they needed it. They used the public to get information out, to use them to help solve the case. They worked hand in hand with the community. In fact, I think there was a comment from one who followed the case that says it all. Here's what he said. Here's how he recorded his own involvement as a quote-unquote armchair detective. He says, quote, "Unfortunately, I was one of those armchair detectives in these comment sections that criticized law enforcement on the case. I was certain that it would go cold." And he says, "I apologize. I am insanely impressed by the work that went into making this arrest. I've been humbled." What a testimony to law enforcement. I don't know anybody could say that any better. They actually used experts in the case that were impeccable. And the investigation was so strong, so buttoned up. Well, the defense knew there was evidence beyond a reasonable doubt all over this case. Did you hear that? Evidence beyond a reasonable doubt all over the case. Does that sound familiar? Well, in Karen Reed, I think it was the defense attorney, Alan Jackson, he said there was reasonable doubt all over the case. But here, there was evidence beyond reasonable doubt all over the case. You see, that's why Kohberger caved in to save his life from the death penalty. He did not want his day in court. He did not want to prove his innocence because he was guilty. And he did not want to die. This case was so strong, so incredibly strong, that he took the plea and he pled guilty. You see, the difference is that we can see plainly, and we can be proud of law enforcement on the ground in Idaho, unlike what you heard from the case in Canton, Massachusetts, unlike the Karen Reed case, where to this day there is not justice for John O'Keefe. To this day, we really do not know what happened. But here in this, the investigation that was, we know what happened. We know who did it. And we know he's guilty. And we know that he'll never see a day of freedom in his life. So, until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional information and podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Peacemaker Network, and also encourage you to support the first responders, military, and law enforcement personnel by contributing to the Peacemaker Network. That's peacemakernetwork.com. All music and sound effects are courtesy of Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com. You can also support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, tag @CharlieCrimebuster, and then click the subscribe button. By doing so, you'll be notified each time we drop one of our shows. Another more convenient way for you to listen to our podcasts, or for you to say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you, so please send them to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster.